Early modern understandings of health, disease and medicine were heavily influenced by classical medical theories, especially those proposed by the Greek physician Hippocrates and the Roman physician and surgeon Galen. It was Hippocrates' medical theory of the Four Humours, which was later developed in more detail by Galen, that best helped early modern Europeans to understand their bodies and the ailments that affected them. The theory asserted that the human body was made up of four fluids known as humours that had specific elemental qualities. The first humour, blood, was believed to be hot and wet. Phlegm was considered cold and wet, yellow bile hot and dry, and black bile cold and dry. The balance of these four humours within the human body was thought to directly influence a person's health and temperament. When the humours remained balanced, the body remained healthy. However, when a person's humours became unbalanced through the excess or deficiency of one or more humours, the body became diseased and unhealthy. The key to good health in the early modern period, then, was humoral balance. Achieving humoral balance, however, was not easy. That's because each individual was believed to have their own particular balance of humours. These humoral complexions, or temperaments as they were known, were determined by the natural levels of each humour within the body. Those of a phlegmatic disposition were believed to have a cold and moist body that was caused by an abundance of the humour phlegm. Sanguine men were thought to have a hot and moist complexion, their bodies being governed by the humour of blood. Choleric people were hot and dry, their bodies ruled by an abundance of yellow bile, whilst those of a melancholic complexion were cold and dry, their bodies being more active in black bile. A person's natural temperament was driven by a number of variables, such as age and gender. It was thought that the human body naturally lost heat and moisture over a lifetime, meaning that the elderly were more likely to have cold complexions like phlegmatic and melancholic, whilst children were believed to have the hotter temperaments of choleric and sanguine. Similarly, women were believed to have far colder and wetter bodies than those of men, and were thus commonly associated with the phlegmatic temperament. An early modern person could also determine their natural complexion through their physical appearance and individual personality traits. The 17th century physician and botanist Nicholas Culpeper described choleric people as eloquent and courageous, but prone to lying, and typically hairy with yellow, red or flaxen curly hair. In contrast, those of a sanguine temperament were more likely to have blackish or brown hair and a cheerful and merry disposition. People with a phlegmatic temperament were understood to be cowardly, slow and forgetful, and usually small, fat and very pale. Finally, those of a melancholic complexion were described by Culpeper as solitary, envious, fearful cowards who could typically be identified by their dusky brown or flaxen hair. The central aim of early modern medicine was to achieve and maintain humoral balance. This was sometimes done through gruesome procedures such as bloodletting and bodily purges. More commonly though, early modern people attempted to prevent the excess or deficiency of any one humour in the first place through the careful regulation of what was known as the 6 non-natural things. These were external forces that were believed to affect the levels of humours in the body. The first and arguably most important non-natural thing in need of regulation was that of air. Contagious air was believed to arise from processes of decomposition that infected the air. Once inhaled, this infected air would inevitably lead to infected and diseased bodies. Living close to marshy land or stagnant bodies of water was considered particularly dangerous, as these were prime locations of noxious air. These dangers could be offset, however, by growing sweet-smelling herbs and plants in your garden, which combated the disease-carrying odours of bad air. Early modern people also dried their own herbs and plants and burnt them in fuming pots through the home to eradicate harmful vapours and thus help maintain a healthy body. The second non-natural thing in careful need of management was that of food and drink. Food could not only be the cause of unwell bodies through excessive consumption and the eating of inappropriate and unhealthy food, it could also be the cure for humoral imbalance. That's because different foods, like individual bodies, were considered to have specific elemental makeups. For example, pepper was hot and dry, whilst fish was cold and moist. In order to maintain your natural complexion, physicians of the era encouraged people to consume foods that possessed a similar quality to their own temperament. When a person became ill, however, the opposite advice was given. In order to restore humoral balance and banish an abundance of a particular humour, a person was advised to eat food with the opposite elemental qualities of the problematic humour. If a person, for example, was suffering from an abundance of phlegm, a food with the opposite composition, like hot dry pepper, would be prescribed. A good bedtime routine was also considered critical to maintaining health in this period. Sleeping and waking patterns were thus the third category within the 6 non-natural things. The purpose of sleep was believed to be to aid digestion. It was thought that during sleep, the heat of the body was drawn to the stomach where the day's food would be boiled up and broken down. Body heat was therefore critical to this process. Those who had hot complexions, like sanguine and choleric, were advised to sleep for around 7 hours, whilst those of the cold, phlegmatic and melancholic temperaments were encouraged to sleep for 9 hours, as the process of heating food in the stomach for digestion would take longer due to their naturally cold bodies. All early modern people were also advised to sleep with their heads slightly raised with the aid of a pillow or bolster. This would stop the regurgitation of food, as well as preventing toxic humours pooling in the brain and causing negative sleep phenomena such as sleepwalking and nightmares. Just like today, early modern people were encouraged to take a moderate amount of exercise in order to stay healthy. Movement and rest was thus the 4th non-natural thing. For poor labourers or household servants, achieving this was relatively easy, as their daily lives involved undertaking chores and work that required a great deal of physical activity. For those higher up the social ladder, a good amount of exercise could be combined with leisurely activities such as playing games, practicing archery or going hunting. It was particularly important to take some gentle exercise after a large meal. The 5th non-natural thing was excretion and retention. In the early modern period, people were encouraged to cultivate healthy processes of waste evacuation. In its most basic form, this meant going to the toilet regularly. Waste could also be removed from the body by other means. Although bathing was considered unhealthy in this period, early modern people did keep their bodies clean. They did this by firstly keeping their clothes clean, and by secondly using linen cloth to scrub the skin and absorb the waste products that were excreted through sweat. The final external factor in need of regulation was affections of the mind, something we might understand as emotions today. The medical advice of the period encouraged men and women to keep their passions and anxieties in check. One way that early modern people achieved this was through prayer. By asking for God's forgiveness, early modern Christians ensured that their bodies and souls remained pure and healthy. But how did early modern people know all this? How did they know that some foods were bad for them, or that moderate exercise would help them stay healthy? As well as medical advice being passed down from generation to generation orally, the early modern period also witnessed a boom in printed manuals known as regimens, which gave expert advice on how to regulate the 6 non-natural things. But just like today, this advice was not necessarily always followed, nor was it accessible to the many people in this period who couldn't read. The lengths that early modern people went to maintain their bodily health and the amount of books produced on the subject illustrates that the prevention of illness was a central feature of early modern medical understandings. For more information on early modern systems of healthcare, visit www.historiesofsleep.com.